Hello, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to today's webinar, Tech Forward Firms, Why They Have the Inside Track to the Future. I'm Gail Perry, Editor-in-Chief of CPA Practice Advisor, and I'll be your moderator today. Before we get started, I'd like to explain how CPE for this webcast works. The webcast qualifies for 1 credit of continuing professional education. If you plan to earn CPE for attending this session, you must stay with us for at least 50 minutes. In addition, we will display 4 polling questions during the webcast. You'll need to record an answer for at least 3 of these questions, as this is our verification that you are still watching. Later today, you'll receive an email from CPA Practice Advisor that contains a link to your CPE certificate, assuming you met the requirements for CPE. Please note that we can give CPE credit for multiple people watching on the same computer. So if there are others in your office who would like to attend this event at the same computer, please have them join you now. And at the end of the event, we'll provide an opportunity for you to send us their email addresses so they too can receive CPE credit. At any time, you can enter any questions you might have in the Ask a Question box that appears on your screen, and our speakers will try to get to as many questions as possible during the presentation. Any questions not answered during this live webinar will be addressed by the speakers afterwards via email. The slides for this event are available for download by clicking the Event Resources option at the bottom of your screen. Click on that, and then a PDF is displayed, and you can click that to download the files. Also, the archived version of this presentation will appear on the CPA Practice Advisor website after the event ends. CPE credit will not be available, though, for watching the archived version. So today we are joined by Matthew Stevenson, CEO of SafeSend, and Shannon Jenks, Executive Vice President, Growth and Business Development at SafeSend. And now we are ready to begin.
Great. Thank you, Gail. And thank you, everyone, for joining today for Tech Forward Firms, Why They Have the Inside Track to the Future. And I would just say, as we start, this is a topic that Shannon and I are really passionate about. And so hopefully this is informative. And as Gail mentioned, as you have questions throughout, please drop them in the chat and we'll do our best to respond. In terms of the agenda for today, we'll really cover a couple of things. One is, why the status quo no longer works. 2 is, what are really the advantages of being tech forward? 3, and I think almost most importantly, what do you need to do to realize the benefits of being tech forward or of technology in general? And then we'll open it up to Q&A. So the first is, why does the status quo no longer work? And in my mind, there's sort of 3 core macro trends in the industry that really are just increasing the need for technology to augment firms. And these are not going to be a surprise to the folks on this call, but the 3 big ones for us are obviously around the staffing shortage, I think fundamentally changed and evolved client expectations, and obviously the most recent news a couple of weeks ago about the most compressed filing season in at least a generation. Anything that you'd add to that, Shannon, or sort of commentary?
I think the tax season is probably, the compressed filing season is going to be interesting, but luckily we have technology to help.
Yeah. And so I thought, even though I think each of those sort of macro trends is probably something that folks are aware of, I think it's helpful to just underline some of the facts, which I think just make it more tangible around how critical these are in terms of just evolving firms. The first is obviously around the staffing crisis, and just a reality check. Every time I look at these numbers, I'm sort of stunned at the reality of the situation, right? You have 300,000 accountants that have left the workforce since 2020. You've got 70% of CPAs that are expected to retire in the next decade. You've had a 17% decline in accounting graduates. Even the most recent stats would say that's down another sort of 7% since even the data on this page. And as a result, 82% of firms cite staffing as their top issue. So no surprise, just given those stats. Again, just don't think you can overstate how how much of a factor this is for firms and how much we hear, day in, day out from our existing customers and from prospects we talk to. So with that, I had thought to move to a polling question with Gail.
Okay, this is our first polling question. Does your firm's tax workflow help mitigate the effects of the staffing shortage in the tax and accounting profession? And the answer choices are yes, staffing is not an issue for us. Yes, but there is more we can do. No, or not sure. So choose the answer that is most appropriate in your situation, and then click the submit button to send in your answer. Meanwhile, if you have any problems answering the question online, you can always type your answer in the Ask a Question box and we'll record it there. Okay, and answers are coming in, but it's looking like about half of the attendees are saying that choosing the second option, yes, but there's more that we can do.
We can always do more, right? That's the benefit of working within technology is there's always room to grow and to do something better and more efficient. So.
Yeah, I'm actually interested. So there's about a third of the audience that would say, their workflow has enabled them to avoid sort of staffing issues. I'd be really interested, and you can use the Ask a Question box. Like if there are any interesting things that you've done to address sort of staffing, I think it'd be really helpful. We can read out some of the responses for the group. And Shannon, just curious from your perspective, like, as you think about this one, are there any encouragements you'd have to folks or things that you've heard from firms? Like one I always think is important is, as you think about your tax workflow, is just actually mapping out the tax workflow itself to just understand where are the pockets of efficiency and candidly inefficiency. But curious if there's anything else you might add.
Yeah, I mean, mapping it out, Matthew, is probably I've worked with thousands of firms and becoming more efficient in both the front end of their workflow and tax as well as their back end. And being able to actually sit down and map out what your process is, it can be a daunting task because they are very convoluted processes and people do them differently. And one of the things that we do well at SafeSend is listening to firms in order to, to share what other firms are doing. Like Matthew asking you this question, like, what are you doing yourselves that you feel is helping you so that we can share that information as well with our firms. But being able to map it out, recognize where you're winning within your processes, but more importantly, where you have gaps or room for an opportunity for improvement will help you immensely in making your technology choices, staffing choices. Where do you have those pockets that you need more professional, help as a person, or where can you use technology to fill that gap? So that's their biggest piece of advice to firms when we're working with them, as just from a consultative perspective to help them bring more efficiency into all of their workflows. But starting with the mapping and even one piece of it, front end or the back end, is a really great place to start.
Yeah, I know we'll touch on it later. I think two things that I would encourage folks on this call to consider. One is, having somebody within the firm who's really leading and responsible for technology decisions. And obviously in a larger firm, that might be a committee. If you're a sole proprietor, that's obviously going to be difficult to do. So fully recognize the capacity limitations. And so in that case, you're probably better off leaning on whether it be an association, like a BDO or a boomer or an external consultant. That obviously is important, just to make sure that you've got somebody who's really thinking about this and whose responsibility it is, even if it's not full-time. And then the mapping, the issue is the mapping, the sort of workflow and process, as Shannon sort of referenced, I think is just so critical because, one of the mistakes that we do see with firms who I think say, hey, listen, we really want to adopt new technology and be more tech forward is that, if you jump into, hey, we want to go look at XY tools and haven't mapped out your process, what often happens is you may not address the core underlying issues in the workflow, and or you may end up with overlapping technologies. I think we see that a lot where, a firm may have 3 different versions of a portal because they've bought individual pieces and each have portal-like functionality. And so, or, they've gotten a SafeSend, but they're also still using a DocuSign for engagement letters and haven't sort of thought through, actually the reality is a lot of capabilities in this case of SafeSend, could replace DocuSign for some of those other sort of pure signatures. And so we just really encourage you to, make sure that at the front end, you have somebody whose job it is to really think about this, and then 2, just spend the time to sort of map out that workflow. Pivoting a little bit to, the point around client expectations and just how much they've evolved. Like, I always think this slide is striking just around how much COVID was an accelerant for the use of technology across all age groups. So this is 3 examples. This is video conferencing, telehealth, and e-commerce. In the instances of telehealth and video conferencing, you'll see, pre and post COVID, it's like a 3 to 4x increase in the usage. The most relevant, because obviously this is a big misconception that I hear in the industry a lot, is, hey, listen, I've got an older client base. My older clients are less predisposed to technology. I think these examples would highlight the reality is, like, some of the biggest gains that we've seen since COVID have been in that sort of older cohort of folks ages 55 and plus. And the sort of, the proof point that I would use for that is, our customers sort of, are broadly representative of the industry as a whole. 96% of the electronic tax returns that are sent out by our customers are signed within 2 weeks in an average of 3 days. And 1.5 million of those tax returns are signed by people over the age of 55. And so again, I think all of this is basically to say, we've all had probably preconceived notions of what our customers and consumers, are willing and able to do as it relates to technology. We've just seen a fundamental shift or acceleration in the adoption of technology over the last 5 years. Anything you'd add to that, Shannon? I know this is a topic you get a lot, or comes up a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I'll save it for the slide down below. I do have additional, but I don't want to repeat myself too much, which I know I do, but that's the misconceptions aspect of technology and how it benefits is my favorite piece to talk about.
All right. Let's jump to our next polling question.
Okay. This question is, which of these problems are top priority for technology?
I'm sorry, gang. I'm sorry, Gail. I think we missed one slide. There we go. One back.
You kind of flew through that. I didn't know if you wanted to go back.
Yeah,
to
so
that.
Okay.
Never good if the person who works at a technology firm makes a technological error. But there we go. There we have it. On to Shannon.
That's
All right,
fine.
we'll hold that polling question.
We'll get to that next. I'll ping you, Gail. Thanks, everyone. So why do some firms seem to be unaffected by the staffing shortage or that shorter filing season, the compressed one that we're really being pushed to, or higher client expectations? And I think, simply put, they're winning because of technology and automation. They're willing to accept that change and adopt the technology. And if you do that, really all 5 of these items that are all interrelated, I know that will become and can and will become more of a reality for a firm. We'll go through these briefly, but just a little color on each one. But item number 1, your client's experience will become more efficient. It's going to be a lot less frustrating, more positive for everyone, which gives you a better name within your relationship. Number 2, firm's perception. Now more than ever, it's important for your firm to have a more modern and competitive look. We are seeing a much younger generation in need of accounting services, really pushing the industry into more of, the latest trends. Item number 3 on here, this one's especially important. Adopting technology will make your firm more attractive when hiring new firms, but also retain your existing staff. It's human nature. Everyone wants to feel that the work they're doing is meaningful and will provide some aspect of professional growth. And technology really allows your team to achieve both that meaningfulness as well as to grow within their profession. Item number 5, security, always at the top of mind. And it gives you peace of mind knowing that the information being transferred to and from your clients and sitting within the system are secure. Everything needs to be secure and everyone needs to remain compliant. And then lastly, and something we're all looking for in life, we need more time. So building some efficiency and some savings is really going to make all of what we just discussed, those 4 other items, more of a reality. So savings and more time, both directly and indirectly, are big wins. Again, these are all intertwined and related to one another, and we plan to dive into a little bit to some of these right after this next polling question that I unfortunately interrupted Gail from presenting. So polling question number 2.
Okay, and some of you have already answered this because it did pop up on the screen, but here's the next polling question. Which of these problems are the top priority for technology to address? And the options are staffing shortage, reduce manual tasks, improve the client experience, augment security, or reduce costs. So figure out which one you think is top priority and choose that and click the submit button. And if the question isn't popping up on your screen, you can go ahead and post your answer in the ask a question box and we'll record it there. And it looks like with the answers that are coming in right now, it looks like reducing manual tasks is hands down going to be the winner here.
Absolutely. And it should be, reducing those manual tasks is going to be related to all of our other aspects of your business.
Yeah, Shannon, like how consistent or representative, like if you think about what we see here, and sort of the customers that we talk to in terms of their broader use of technology, like where in your mind do you think they've seen the greatest impact from technology as you look across these?
Reducing manual tasks is a big one. And I think that I'd say reducing manual tasks as well as improving the client experience. That's huge. Improving the client experience. Those are 2 big focus points for SafeSend in general, just as a company. And as we've broadened our services and our solutions that we're offering, but also just making sure that the client can utilize it. You can reduce all the internal manual tasks that you can do, but if your client doesn't utilize it, all of that is really, it's a moot point. You want your clients to be able to utilize the technology and efficiencies that you're implementing. I can talk a little bit more about that too, as to how to get them to utilize it. But those would be my two picks. How about yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I tend to think of it as, as you're thinking about the adoption of this, a lot of times the ROI as a firm to go ahead and make the investment is largely around sort of B, the reduction in manual tasks, which then helps obviously with E and sort of the cost reduction side, et cetera. So that's the way to make the business case. I think the unexpectedly pleasant surprise that we consistently hear from customers, not just as it relates to SafeSend, but other technologies as well, is around, I think, what you were describing around the improvement in client experience. Where they will say, hey, we didn't base our quote unquote business case or our adoption technology 100% on that impact. I think they're always, pleasantly surprised around how much improvement they've actually seen in the response that they get from their customers. So with that, as Shannon mentioned, we'll talk through, if you think about those sort of 5 things, the 5 benefits of being technology forward, we'll now walk through a few of those just to say, okay, what does that sort of tangibly mean? How do we bring that to life? So,
yep. And staffing is important to all businesses' success, not just the tax and accounting industry. And, with the shortage, although getting better, that Matthew was mentioning earlier. You want to attract, even if you didn't have a shortage, you want to attract the right people, and you want to make sure you retain those that want to work for you, and they have that meaningful work that they're doing, as well as that growth path. People will go above and beyond for you. So how does technology really help accomplish this is the question. And we touched upon some of these, as I'm sure you've experienced. Candidates today are requiring a hybrid option. They want to work from home. They also want to go into the office, or vice versa. They would rather be in the office. But this offers a much better work-life balance. And I think we all have always wanted this type of flexibility, but couldn't with the security and compliance risks. You needed to be in the office. But secure technology ensures, you're not having to sacrifice that quality of life over peace of mind, which really helps staff continue to show up and feel like the work that they're doing is meaningful. Now, you're going to have staff turnover. That's inevitable. People will always be changing jobs. All you can do as a firm is plan for it and be ready. So using the right tools within technology around workflow, regardless of if it's at the front end or the back end, will only make that succession planning much easier. You'll be able to train people much faster, and your client's experience won't be affected. So we're hitting on those 2 points again, reducing those manual tasks to retain them, but also making sure that the tools that are in place do not affect your client's experience. So you want to make sure that the technology also that you're adopting is creating a positive environment for your team, but also your clients. So both of those are really, really important.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is, I think sometimes there's a perception that staff within a firm may be apprehensive around technology, not because of just change management as it relates to technology, but what does it mean for my job and job security? And I know early on in the early days of SafeSend, I think that was always something that we tread carefully around. I think the reality of what we've seen is, like, if you look at who are the biggest champions and advocate of SafeSend, and frankly, similar tools across different pieces of the workflow, it's almost always the sort of core admin staff and processing staff who are really the biggest champions. And I think they understand that may mean that there are fewer temp staff that are hired, or that, may operate in a leaner model than have before. But the reality is, and I hear this so consistently, is life-changing from a day-to-day standpoint in terms of their experience. And so as you think about retention, that difference in terms of their day-to-day makes a real impact.
Absolutely. Okay. I would say one of the most important here, which we didn't touch upon in those other 5, but security. And this part, security and compliance can feel very daunting and almost unattainable in today's world. But luckily, we've come a long way since I've worked at SafeSend. There are required processes in place that can help ensure your firm and client data is at the forefront of all solutions minds. So that is something that we at SafeSend have always done. You're going to be, going through third-party SOC reports, so audits. There'll be an audit trail, regular security updates, penetration testing. All of these are required and actually available to you as customers of these solutions. So, make sure you're arming yourself and asking those questions. Hey, can I have access to your SOC report? Not that you want to go read it. It's not the most relaxing read or pleasurable, but it is important. It will give you that, I guess, sense of security that you'll have the ability to feel that you're secure and that the client's information. So you don't have that worrying of where did that go within the mail? Like, I mailed you something. Did it get there? Was my email secure? Is the client sending me information back secure? Matthew's going to share some of our clients. I think it's Han Camp Kruger success stories on moving from a manual to an automated process. And a big part of why they were doing so was around security, as well as that workflow automation that you all had represented was most important to you. But make sure that you're arming yourself and asking those right questions. Can I see those SOC reports? How often are you are you going through the audit? Can I see them? What are your security updates? Where's the information stored? What location? The United States, elsewhere. All of those are really important to ask and are available to you now.
Yeah, depending on the size, it may seem overwhelming at first to say, hey, do I need to be a security expert to ask the right set of questions? I think my counsel is that's where things like, asking if somebody is SOC 2 certified is a good signal, right? Yes, if you're a larger firm, you can do a full-on security review of your technology vendors. The reality is, anybody who's SOC 2 compliant and of a certain size and scale, the reality is are going to in 99% of the cases have the right things in place that you can feel confident that, yes, if I go with this vendor, I'm going to get the benefits listed on this page. And then, the next one is obviously around the efficiency savings. And I have a sort of couple of examples here. And the examples here are not necessarily to just say, hey, you can end up, saving significant amounts of money by adopting technology. That would probably come as no surprise. And in this example with HonCamp, it's less necessarily around, okay, they save 50,000 moving from, manual based return delivery and signing to digital return delivery. That's probably not a surprise. The key piece here that I would call out is if you actually look at, and it's tough to tell on the screen, but I would encourage you, if you look at the material afterwards, to just look at the individual line items. But if you look at the line items, the interesting call out is of the sort of $70 in savings per return that they were seeing, more than 60% of that is actually from things that aren't related to the actual sort of paper itself, right? Like the single biggest area of savings is just the partner time spent on reviewing the return and handling the return, even things like opening envelopes, et cetera. It's actually way more around the firm processes and workflows than it is the paper and postage and envelope costs. And so that again just reinforces that conversation that we had earlier, which is around the importance of mapping the workflow. Because if HonCamp had not mapped the workflow at the beginning, well, then maybe the ROI actually looks pretty different on whether or not it would have made sense, because the majority of the benefit and savings that they're getting is from all of the actual firm workflow efficiencies that they got.
Yeah, the intangibles is something to take into consideration where you might not see it. It might just be like a motion in which you're doing every day, like Matthew said, opening an envelope, but that all takes time. It's all very time related. And not everything can you touch, like a hard cost of paper and envelopes and postage, but also the security, again, bringing that into play as to where did that paper go? How did it get there? How are they going to get it back to me? Having to call them all of the time. These all might be, motions in which you're used to, the tracking of information, but it's no longer needed to be a manual. It's no longer needed for you to have to manually to handle these. You want that tracking and visibility, and this is where they're seeing a lot of that savings.
Yeah, I was just talking actually yesterday to a firm that's got a pretty significant set of sophisticated clients, like family office structures. And they were actually talking about the big benefit for them is sort of adjacent to security is, where you've got some pretty complex returns across, multiple entities, et cetera. For them, just having all of the audit trails digitally available so they can see it is just a huge benefit as they're trying to sort of, coordinate with the controller of the family office or the CFO of the family office. So just an example of that. The next efficiency saving is more to make the point around even something that at first glance, when you think about your workflow, seems relatively small, can actually be pretty material in terms of savings. So this example is basically e-file automation. Actually has nothing to do with SafeSend in this particular case, but it's an example of how Pinion basically automated e-filing, and that alone saved them $3 a return. So obviously, firm of significant scale, they had 20 people who were basically just managing, e-filing, and the automation of the sort of taking the 8879 and then pushing that straight to being e-filed, enabled them to reduce that group from 20 individuals down to 3. And so again, it's something as innocuous as like, oh, I need to go into the e-file dashboard and press this and review this before I do that. Just automating something as simple as that can save you $3 a return. And so again, it's just around thinking around like, hey, there are these little pockets all across my workflows, which cumulatively add up to pretty significant potential savings. Let alone, I think they would say that in their case, they were able to reallocate those 20 headcount to, frankly, like higher value and more, frankly, fulfilling activities within the firm. And so that was, going back to the staff retention piece, a big ancillary benefit. It's like, yeah, we saw savings that we didn't have to then staff up this sort of e-file team, and the people that historically had done that, they're now working on things that are a lot more exciting than basically, going into the e-file dashboard.
Sounds better to me. These are great success stories. Again, the e-filing portion of opinions review is something that we have focused on as a company and as a software as we look at our roadmap for development, as well as to look at where firms are finding efficiencies maybe outside of SafeSend, and how can we kind of piggyback onto those to bring more efficiency within one program. So always listening.
Yeah, it was actually interesting, not to make this about SafeSend, but
right.
based on what we heard from Pinion, we actually said, hey, this actually has to be a priority for us, because the reality is they're of a certain size and scale where they could do that. And in their case, they were working with basically a third-party firm called Vigilance to enable that. But it ends up being pretty costly, right? Where unless you're a firm of significant scale, like it's not going to make sense. So we are now doing that. We'll launch our first 2 basically e-file automations with initially UltraTax and GST later this year. For again, the same reason of like, once we realized like, hey, this was a real pain point in area of manual work for firms, it was around, okay, how do we automate that? We've automated it now with at least 2 of the tax prep softwares, and our goal is to do it across the remaining major tax prep softwares. We recognize like, hey, something small, but it adds up to cumulatively a big amount of time that folks are spending.
On the flip side, what happens if you choose to not evolve and adopt the latest and greatest technology and efficiencies? Well, obviously, all of the benefits we spoke about previously will become much harder to achieve, and in some cases, impossible for you. We all know the dreaded deadline seasons, although I hear within the market that there is no more busy season. It's busy all of the time. But they're going to remain miserable for a lot of people. And, you're going to have your staff burning out because of these manual, tedious processes that you all spoke about wanting to improve or to automate. And, you want to make sure you're having those in place because, you don't want anyone frustrated, and you don't want unhappy clients. These clients could look elsewhere for their needed services should their experience not be a positive or a pleasant one. So, also, hiring top talent will not be an option. With so many larger firms and small to mid-sized firms really moving into this technology era, falling behind, going into a more manual process for new hires is going to be a little bit hard to combat. You're going to be creating higher operational costs with lower profit margins. All of this is going to limit your firm's ability to grow, which is the goal of owning a firm and to working is to grow that book of business. But, I do think it's important that not evolving with technology is a really bleak and kind of depressing story in my book, but you don't have to be a part of it. You can focus on what you can do to realize the benefits of technology, and really own that, so you can control your firm's success, which is a good place to be. But first, we do have our next polling question. I don't know, Matthew, if you have anything to add as far as the cost of inaction and adopting technology before we move on.
No, I mean, I think, again, it goes back to, that very first slide around like, hey, there are some just fundamental macro factors that make it the way that we've operated as an industry over the last 10, 20 plus years, like that's just really challenging going forward. And so like this will start to become more of a must-do hygiene factor and less around necessarily even being tech forward and more just being like the appropriate level of technology adoption.
That's a good point.
Okay.
All right. Our next polling question.
Here we go. Our third polling question is, what is the top barrier keeping you from adopting new technology? And the answer options are upfront cost or costs that don't align with firm cash flow, convincing others in the firm of the value or the ROI, client adoption, they're not tech savvy enough, firm capacity or implementation requirements, or none. I know we need to be more tech forward. So pick the answer that is most likely holding you back, if you are holding back at all, from embracing technology, and then click the submit button.
This part is my favorite discussion point, mainly because I hear it often. And also because we've learned as a technology company so much from these.
So our answers are coming in slowly, but as they're coming in, it appears that it's kind of across the board.
Yeah, we'll give folks another minute, and then we'll talk through a couple of these just around like maybe our perspective and maybe a few thoughts around some of these. Maybe, yeah, I'll give folks another few seconds. Maybe we start with, so, I think as Gail mentioned, pretty evenly distributed between upfront costs, convincing others in the firm of the ROI for client adoption, and none. You just know you need to be more tech forward. And for those in that bucket, like, I applaud you for sort of the conviction around like, hey, this is something we know we need to do. I think for the largest group, which is the upfront costs or costs that don't align with firm cash flows, my sort of push or suggestion here would be, I think if you ask most technology vendors, SafeSend included, I think the reality is most will work with you on, call it, whether it be, 6-month financing, whether it be something that is better seasonally aligned to the cash flows. Like, I would really encourage you to just, if you think technology or technology provider is the right answer for you, to have that discussion, because I think more times than not, you're going to find that they're going to be pretty receptive, because if they work in the tax industry, like, the reality is like they're going to understand the seasonality of cash flows. Certainly we do. Maybe somebody who's a purely horizontal might appreciate that a little bit less. But any of the sort of tax-focused vendors are going to deeply appreciate this and will work with you on that. I don't know, Shannon, anything that you would add to that? Obviously, that is one that we hear a lot, and so I know even for us that's been a big evolution just in terms of the percentage of firms that we see that are on financing plans, et cetera.
Yeah, it's definitely, as things become more expensive and as the technology, as when you need to implement, as the implementation timing becomes a little bit closer to those, I guess, busier seasons or those deadline seasons, software companies need, or solutions companies, they need to offer those types of I guess, flexibility for firms. And as Matthew had mentioned, SafeSend in itself we have really become offering more different financing options for firms, especially to get them implemented and utilizing the software during this extension season quicker. It helps quite a bit to get people to adopt earlier in the year, even though they don't have the cash flow, but we can manage that. And we don't offer any sort of financing fees, like there's no interest by any means. And I think that the majority of solutions out there offer the same.
Yeah, that's right. I think folks who are focused on the tax base like understand the cash flow or the seasonality of cash flows, and so I think what we do is I would hope, and I think largely representative of at least the major players that I'm aware of. The other piece that I think you can also evaluate, and it's something that I think we've increasingly seen and candidly push a lot of our customers towards now is sometimes it's I think we've seen an evolution in the business model, but of a lot of technology firms that serve the tax and accounting space, where it's now on a usage basis, right, on a per return basis, et cetera, as opposed to historical. Hey, just you have a license and it's all you can eat, which can be pretty expensive. When you go to the usage based model, and something that we now push our firms is like, hey, if you want, buy a smaller package initially, see the actual value, and then you can actually then augment it as you've sort of started to prove out some of the efficiencies within the firm, or right size your purchase for when your cash flows and when are actually coming in. So in addition to the financing, there's also just around like, what's the size of the purchase that you make up front. Then on the convincing others in the firm of the value or ROI, like Shannon, I'd love your perspective, because obviously you've helped hundreds or thousands of firms over the years with this, right? Where you have a champion within the firm that's trying to then say, hey, how do I convince my other partners? Like, what have you found to be sort of most effective?
Very similar to, the upfront cost is starting small. And this is a way for you to get in the door, to start with your clients and really then become the champion. And it won't be hard to convince if they can see the value and the efficiencies that you've gained with your book of business and your clients. We do a lot of, you're presenting to two different mindsets within the software. You have the administrators that are really utilizing it, that are removing those manual tasks. And then you have those partners that are the decision makers that are really focused on the ROI and their client's experience. So depending on who we're speaking with would really be, it's kind of how you determine your talk track, right? As where they'll see the benefits. And I think that, if you are the champion of wanting to adopt this technology and becoming more efficient, it's starting with your book of business and starting smaller, and solutions should offer that, right? And then you can expand as you're seeing those efficiencies and are better equipped to kind of convince those that are, we used to have a name for people we couldn't convince. I just moved, so I don't have, we actually had a statue. I don't remember what they were called, but, it's usually pretty easy once you've seen and felt it's more tangible within the firm, the efficiencies with the technology, to convince those that were the laggards within the firm.
Yeah, I just think back to my own professional services days, and I would just say, certainly in a larger firm, like you can say, hey, okay, it's a top-down edict. I think the most impactful in a professional services firm, I think about it like across our offices. It was always like, if an office or a partner was actually just fundamentally successful, and they were getting positive client feedback or they were getting positive staff feedback, there is nothing that motivated others than seeing their peers do something that was successful. And so again, to this point of if you have a champion within the firm and they want to take this on for their, portfolio of clients, showing success there, that's going to be the most powerful, right? Certainly, we and other vendors can certainly help you try and quantify savings, et cetera, and, make a compelling argument. But again, if you have the optionality, starting with it within a part of the firm and showcasing the real results, nothing is there's nothing that's as powerful a substitute for that. I think the client adoption, I think we talked about that. I think this is probably the most common misconception that we see. And again, I think the testament is, in our case, there's more than 1.5 million returns that we process a year, that are from people over the ages of 55. I think the other thing that would sort of push people on is the approach as you think about how you engage with clients. And Shannon can speak to this a lot because she's seen it so effectively as she's worked with firms over the years. But is to have more of a opt-out versus opt-in mentality, mainly setting the expectation with clients around like, hey, this is a change. It's different, but it is better for you. And yeah, they can opt out as opposed to opt in. And that's important. Like, even if you think about rolling something out within a firm or just your colleagues, the reality is like change is difficult for anybody. What we pretty quickly find is like, and again, not just with SafeSend, with I think most of the other technology solutions that I see in the industry, it's like once clients get their hands on and have used it, like they say, there's no going back, right? Like they would never want to go back to the old system. That doesn't universally apply, but broadly, I think, and so feeling confident enough to say, hey, listen, like this is what the expectation is, and allowing people to opt out versus having to have them opt in, I think is really important. But Shannon, maybe you can speak to this because this is one that I think, you live and breathe a lot with our customers and their clients.
Absolutely. And this is on the next slide. I don't know if you want to move forward to slide 15, Matthew, but with the, it's important to be an advocate for yourself and the new process that you're standing behind here. So with the client's part here on the slide, but you don't want to, why you've made the changes. That you kept the client's best interest at the forefront of your decision. So don't instantly devalue the decisions by allowing your clients to opt in, as we were suggesting. A lot of firms will say, hey, this is our new process. We've adopted it. Opt out if you don't. This is how we're going to be doing business going forward. And if you don't, and I know that I saw this question actually within the Q&A, but firms are not going, or clients are not going to balk at an additional $25 in order to gain efficiency and the convenience of what technology can offer and the security. And it's really up to you to relay that message, and solutions will always have that help available to you as to how to word that. But you want to make sure that you're saying, this is what we've decided to do for these reasons, gaining efficiency, security purposes, your client's experience. We want to make sure that we have, we're using the latest and greatest technology to keep everything secure. If you don't want to do that, you can opt out. However, you're going to be charged an additional $25, $50, whatever the cost of the paper is for your firms. And that was the question is, do you see firms pushing that cost to the client themselves that, your old process would? And absolutely, we do all of the time. We see that where they say, oh, well, my client really likes paper. And it's like, that's fine. If you still want paper, we will offer you that, but it costs us so much more money to do it. And we're going to have you foot that bill, so to speak. So require they adopt it so that your firm can see the ROI that you were sold upon. Staffing doesn't become an issue. And you have that peace of mind that the information moving to and from your firms is secure. And that should all be at the top of your minds, clients, as well as obviously yours for making that decision. So really owning the decision to move forward and to be more technology, within the firm and with your clients is hugely important.
Yeah, and I think, the other, I think it's been a great segue into like, okay, what do you have to do to realize the benefits of technology? Obviously, we talked about, hey, really sort of 5 core benefits that we see of, tax and accounting firms that adopt technology and are tech forward. Like, okay, what do you actually really have to do? I think Shannon talked about the importance of with your clients being an advocate. I think within the firm would recap a few things that we've touched on in different elements. Like, one is identifying the person or persons, right, the committee, to lead firm technology decisions. I think if you don't have somebody that's on point for that, and again, it doesn't have to be somebody within the firm. It can be an external resource. It can be an association. It's just difficult to then get to the right decisions. 2 is, and I just can't overstate the importance of this, but just mapping the firm processes to identify, like, what do you really need to address? I think if I see it's not a failure point, but sometimes where I'll get a little bit concerned is if somebody can't answer, what is it that you're actually trying to address? Like, you want to be able to answer that to make sure that whatever solution it is that you're buying is actually going to be able to address it in the way that you need. 3, and we'll actually talk about this in a second, is like having just a simple checklist to evaluate providers against. I'm always surprised, and listen, like, probably probably the case with us as well. But I'm always surprised by when I sort of ask this question, from say, oh, actually, we don't really have any sort of like criteria that we gauge providers against. I would just encourage you, it doesn't need to be like a 2 week exercise to pull together the criteria, but have some simple criteria where you say, hey, I'm going to talk to 3 players that are providing X or Y. Like, I want to be able to compare them against a common set of things. And then the last is just around embracing change, right? The reality is, like, you have to be willing to change your processes. And at the end is going to be better than the current state, but you got to be willing to embrace that change. And that's something that we talk about a lot because we obviously use technology across the board in our firm. But again, you have to recognize, like, with any new technology, whether it's internal or external, like that's going to bring change. And then, I think speaking on the checklist, I thought, and, I would encourage you guys, if you guys don't have one today, maybe just print this out as a starting point for yourself. But I thought about, like, what are the things that I would look for if I were considering a tax technology provider? I listed 5 here. For me, 3 of these are really sort of like must-haves. The other 2, I think, are nice-to-haves. The 3 must-haves. So one is, you're obviously going to buy a solution based on the existing offering today, for sure. As part of that, you want to understand, like, what is their R&D track record. Part of that will be reflected in the solution that it is today, and then how they have evolved over time. And then equally importantly is, like, listen, like, you should not just be buying the product for what it is today, but also, what that roadmap looks like over the next 6 to 12 months. And again, my counsel here is, you don't want to over-rotate towards the latter and just be buying on a roadmap. I certainly wouldn't do that myself, right? Like, you want somebody who has a proven track record of when they say, hey, we're going to go deliver this, they deliver it, but they also have a view on here's what's coming in the future. But you do want to make sure that people have the combination of both. And that, I find, is like becomes pretty self-evident when you talk with firms, frankly, like within this space and outside this space. Like, you can tell within a 15-minute conversation whether a firm does or doesn't have this, or whether they're selling vaporware. Second, and I think this is probably the most underappreciated one, but if you don't have it, is extraordinarily painful, which is a commitment to an open ecosystem. Basically, what that just means is you are, like, that the firm is committed to integrating with whatever other vendors are that you want to use, that it's interoperable, right? Like, SafeSend, as an example, has always said, hey, we are going to support and integrate with all of the major tax softwares. Similarly, we've been investing, for example, in integrating with the various payment providers, CPA Charge and iWin, Stripe, etc. Like, you want somebody who has that belief of, like, hey, I don't want to lock you in to my set of things. I want you to be able to plug into whatever other vendors you think are best for you. I think this is a really critical one, because if you don't, then you're sort of stuck, and oftentimes you're sort of stuck with, frankly, subpar solutions. So I think this is a critical one to ask and, say, hey, what integrations do you or don't you have in place with different categories of providers? I will say on this one, like, historically, if I thought about 10 years ago in the industry, this was an extraordinarily weak point in the industry. I think all of the major tax prep softwares were not committed to this. I think that has evolved significantly. I think Intuit probably led on that front. And I think Thomson Reuters is now very, very committed to it. So again, I think you're starting to see, this be a real sort of sea change within the industry, which I think is to everyone on this call's benefit. And then the third, which, is self-obvious, but I would really encourage you to say, hey, get strong customer references. And it's always like, can you provide me at least with 3 names of customers who have a similar profile to me? Or even more powerful is if you're a part of an association and you can say, hey, can you just get me the list of all of the firms that are in a part of that association, and I want to make my own calls. That's the most powerful. A firm that will do that is one that believes strongly in their product. Everyone can probably pick like 2 customers that are satisfied with them. If they say, hey, listen, like, go talk to anybody at the Boomer conference, you know that that's probably a firm that stands behind their product. The fourth one is around, I think, just simple pricing aligned to firm economics. For me, this is, I believe strongly in a model that is more usage based, whether it's on a per return basis and something else, so that it's aligned to your cash flow and it's aligned to what you actually utilize. And then the last is one that's tax industry focused. 10 years ago, there probably weren't enough players that were tax industry focused to address this. That's changed. The reality now is, like, if you look at all the logos on the left-hand side, and there's probably a bunch of others, there are a ton of firms now who are tax industry focused. Like, you're going to benefit from that. The reality is, like, the reason that we exist is because, we said, hey, listen, like, there are e-signature solutions. They don't fit the need of the tax industry as well as we think it needs. And so my encouragement would just be, pick from any of the dozens now of tax industry focused vendors.
Okay,
So,
moving somewhat quickly here. If we want to go, I can quickly through some of the common misconceptions, which we've already talked about throughout the presentation, because I know we have a hard stop. All three of these, I hear all three of these for, why firms don't fully adopt technology all of the time. I hear to tell you that, at least with SafeSend, they are all misconceptions, all right? The cost is too high. My clients won't adopt it. They're older. We don't have time. Your clients are more than willing to pay the extra cost for the efficiency and convenience, okay? No usernames and passwords, and the solution is easy to use. Great, I'm in. My clients won't adopt it. They're too old. This is the most common that I hear. As Matthew mentioned, COVID really pushed everyone to adopt technology in all aspects of their life. Medical portals, prescription orders, grocery orders. People can handle it, right? Over 1.5 million tax returns were e-signed by people over than 55 using SafeSend. They're able. It's our job to recognize that. We don't have time. Now, in your defense, some technologies do take a long time to implement, but most can have you up and running within hours, okay? Again, look for those solutions that allow you to move you at your own pace, offer that phased approach, start with the front end process, automate the gathering of source documents and delivering organizers this year, and then next year look to automate the assembly and delivery returns. You can do it. Just make sure you're not making excuses throughout it to avoid change. You don't want to be left behind all of the other firms that are doing that. So I know we have one more polling question.
Side note, the firm capacity, I recognize, does not apply to changing your tax prep software. That is like a root canal. You probably want to do it at max once in your life. But for the others, I wholeheartedly agree with Shannon.
All right, here's our last quick question. We just want to know if you're interested in learning more about SafeSend. And your answer options are yes, no, or I'm just here for the CPE credits. So pick the answer that is most appropriate for you and submit. And with that, unless you have any final comments, I'll wrap this up with a few housekeeping notes at the end here.
I would say if anyone has any questions, I was going to say, yeah, thank you for everyone. But if you have any questions about solutions that are in the market that you're considering, processes that you're looking, I'm happy to have any discussions with any of you. I know the industry inside and out. I know all of the options that you have available to you. They're not always going to be SafeSend. I 100% understand that. But I can at least try and help you lead in that direction. So let me know if I can be a resource to anyone. I'm here to help.
All right. With that, first of all, I want to thank Matthew and Shannon for an excellent presentation, lots of useful information, and a lot of food for thought. We hope all of you enjoyed today's webinar, and I want to thank all of you for attending. And we'd like to thank SafeSend for making this event possible and enabling us to offer a free CPE credit to each attendee. And speaking of CPE, there will be a email message that you'll get later in the day today from CPA Practice Advisor with information on your CPE credit for today. For those of you who answered questions in the Ask a Question box, you may get our system's automated, so you may get a notice saying you didn't qualify for CPE credit. If you get that notice, just send it right back to me. My email's in the message that you'll get. It's gperry@cpapracticeadvisor.com, and we'll make sure you get your certificate. Let's see. Oh, I wanted to mention too, there are a couple slides at the end of this deck that are there for your resources. So that's a good reason for you, if you haven't already, to download the deck. It's in the event resources section on your screen. Just click on that link there and you'll get a downloadable PDF. And also, if there are others who are watching the event with you who need CPE credit, you can send me their names and email addresses. It's gperry, GPERRY, at cpapracticeadvisor.com, and we will send certificates to them. We're about to put a survey on the screen. We hope you'll take a moment to fill that out so we can continue to improve our webinar series. And I think that's all we've got. Our audio is going to end now. Thank you, everyone.